And thank you so much for staying with us here on Morning Live. Now, earlier this week, SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter told Parliament's Standing Committee on Finance that SARS has made substantial progress in implementing the Nugent Commission's recommendations. Kieswetter informed the committee that US-based consultancy firm Bain had paid back 217 million rand to SARS. Bain assisted, of course, with the restructuring of SARS under former Commissioner Tom Moyane, which ultimately led to the destruction of the revenue collector. Another company, IT consultants Gartner, have declined to pay back monies despite several engagements. So let's get his say on this matter. In studio joining me now, SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good morning, Sakina.
So apparently you've had your hands full, in trying to fix the revenue collection service, and you say there's a culture of fear and a racial tension within the organization.
Yes, again, I mean, sadly and understandably, the tone for the organization is set from the top. Leaders set the tone. And because of what had happened at SARS, it changed the behavior of the senior management, the way they interacted with staff. Trust declined. There was no longer a cohesiveness in the organization around a sense of common purpose. And even today, I have met with over 90% of our staff already through various of our offices. You can still sense the residue of the pain and the trauma that had been caused, and people speak about this openly. In fact, we invite them to speak about it because that's part of the healing process. But then there are also specific streams of work in terms of repairing and addressing that to restore confidence and trust between the employees and ourselves.
Now, speaking of this repair process, and getting things back on track, and speaking to Bain and Gartner, who we mentioned there in the opening. So Bain, they have paid back 217 million rand. But perhaps just worth, dwelling for a moment on what exactly it is that they did. Now, the operating model, I understand, as you've mentioned to the committee, actually hampers SARS's capability to operate. How exactly?
So it's helpful to understand that the organizational arrangement, or the so-called operating model for SARS, was based on international best practice. For example, the way that large businesses and wealthy individuals are managed within revenue authorities worldwide follows a best practice model. Large corporates and wealthy individuals presents the largest and the most significant revenue opportunity for a revenue authority, but also the largest risk. To give you a sense, the large business center is responsible for a third of our revenue. And so what really happened in the reorganization was that the large business center was completely dismantled. Staff were disaggregated and sent into functional streams instead of the trusted segment approach where that the large business was followed on. And so rather than having a coherent approach, a value proposition, really meaning a one-stop service ranging from the service and the enforcement activities, all of these functions were spread and decentralized across the organization, and hence that focused approach was lost, as a result of which also we lost many competent skills who either were moved out of the way or sidelined, and some just lost the will to stay there and also left.
So they've now have Bain and Company, they've paid back 217 million rand to SARS. How did you quantify the 217 million, or how did you get to that figure?
So the 217 million simply reflects the fees that they were paid plus the interest on it. But what we have to understand, and why we believe Bain has a case to answer, Sakina, is that the damage that was caused is incalculable. Just the revenue loss. We've seen a steady decline since 2015 of revenue at SARS. The organizational damage, the decline in and the loss of capability. So how do you ever repay that? So the 217 million pales into insignificance against the real loss that our country suffered. And so we believe that there is still a civil case to answer for that. And then secondly, we've also handed over the matter of Bain, along with Gartner, to the Directorate of Priority Crimes Investigation, the DPCI, or the so-called Hawks, to pursue also and investigate further and see whether there are indeed criminal charges that must be answered to.
Gartner, for their part, they've refused to repay any money, despite several engagements, or has that changed in the meantime?
We will continue to engage with them and with the support of strong legal counsel. We still believe that the value that, the money that was paid to Gartner and the value that they add was not received by the organization. So it's a value for money question that we are following, and then we will also follow to what extent they were aware and therefore complicit or compliant in the broader intention to undermine and erode the competence of SARS.
Now, one of the questions that arises here is, of course, why SARS would use international consultancy firms to begin with.
That's a good question. And it's not just in SARS, it's across many areas of our government. You know, you would hope that international firms bring a global perspective. They have the privilege to see take a revenue authority, for example. There's no other equivalent in South Africa against which we can benchmark. So we would compare ourselves against the Australians, the New Zealanders, the English, the Nordic countries, for example. And these international firms have the possibility and their sphere to do that. But you know, we don't need to go the route of expensive consultants always. As management, as leaders, we're employed to think. We're employed to do the strategic work. And yes, there may be opportunity for benchmarking, but we have access to the OECD. We have access directly with our colleagues around the world, where we build relationships and share information and benchmark ourselves. So I think there's a lot of work we can do on our own first before we come to the need. I'm personally not a great believer in outsourcing our thinking to expensive consultants who in any case sometimes don't serve our interest well.
So what is the situation right now? How many consultancies are currently operating within SARS?
In the consulting and advice space, we're not using any consultants at the moment.
So you've already turned that around?
Obviously, when it gets to highly specialized areas of information technology, we do use external service providers. But the fundamental thinking must be done by the people who are employed to do so. That's myself and the senior leadership team.
Speaking of senior leadership, you have a number of suspensions in keeping with implementing the recommendations of the Nugent Commission. Let's talk about some of those. Slengani Matebula, you've also got Luther Lebelo, Tebogo Mokoena, just some, to mention some. What's the latest in that regard?
So, broadly, when a new chief executive comes into organization, you would conduct a review of your senior leadership to see how you go forward. Because leadership, as I said, is an important and differentiating factor. In the case of the Nugent report, the Nugent Commission requested and recommended that a performance review of all executives who were appointed during the time since 2014, that be reviewed from a number of perspectives. First of all, the nature of their appointment, whether that was regular. Secondly, to what extent they became compliant and supportive of the intention of the former commissioner, and therefore to some extent must answer. And so the names were in the report, and therefore that's where the performance review started. Those individuals were placed on precautionary suspension in order to create a safe space within the confines of policy and law for them to respond and to make representation. That's currently underway. And we hope to conclude that soon so that we can bring certainty into the organization and rebuild a leadership team.
And just finally, with regard to former Commissioner Tom Moyane, SARS is pursuing the recovery of legal costs from him. Just explain to us exactly how much you're hoping to recover from him and also what exactly for.
So there's a number of issues that is currently under review. I share with you three specifically. There was a specific book that was written for which a review was requested and paid for. Secondly, there was a overseas international travel that we are looking at the approval and governance around that. And the third was a matter that relates to another staff member and information that was required in that regard. The amount is just over 2 million, and those we are currently in engagement with the former Commissioner to seek to recover that.
Well, thank you so much for your time this morning. SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, SARS appeared before Parliament's Standing Committee on Finance earlier this week, saying that they have made substantial progress in implementing the Nugent Commission's recommendations. Let's take a break.